that like I've never liked things that really have a name, right? So it's like if your diet is called carnivore and they say that you should never have these foods, that is a very closed-minded point of view to thing. And it's also a very dogmatic approach to it. And it's a very fearful kind of front for marketing. So it's very easy to just pick on something and say that's the problem for it. But let's talk about it. The dose makes the poison. All right, what is up? Episode 57 of Pursuit of Balance. We're going to talk about how the dose makes the poison. This is a subject that, well, actually, it's funny. I was looking up the term, and it was like some Swiss physician, I think, that coined the term. The dose makes the poison. Everything is a dose of poison at a certain dose. I don't know if anybody's ever heard that. My wife didn't hear that when I was telling her this morning of what I was going to talk about today. And really, this kind of, I heard this a lot when you would hear, I'd probably say like more the nutrition world. There's actually one of the books, I have it here. If you guys have never read this book, I would say this is probably one of my all-time favorite books when it comes to nutrition, right? It's called The Perfect Health Diet. He talks about this a little bit too. Dr. Lane Norton, I have his book too, Fat Loss Forever. He talks about this a lot on his page, more on social media. But it's funny, it's like more of like the things of like, okay, when you hear the people like demonize, like, oh, Diet Coke's gonna kill you because of, whatever they have in there. The aspartame, it's gonna kill you because of the Diet Coke, right? And it's funny, you'll see some guys that will do videos and like little edits and remixes on it, and they show like what the actual amounts would need to be to quote unquote be lethal for the body or be harmful for the body, right? And it's like, of course, like, I don't even remember the number, but it was 100 plus Diet Cokes a day or something like that. Like, it's crazy amount. And it's funny because I think about that a lot because I think so many of us, with nutrition and health advice and life advice and just things in general, we're so just like dogmatic. We're so closed-minded. We're so extreme. Obviously we can see that with everything in the world nowadays. It's just like everyone's just got this extreme point of view, but there's no other way than anything else could be possible. And I obviously talk about this so much and just like, as far as like a principle for me that like being a little bit more open-minded towards things is generally kind of the best way to live. And, but whatever, everyone's got their opinion, right? And like when you have an opinion on something and you are a more closed-minded individual, they can't see the light on the other side. They can't see the chance of something else being true, right? So this episode for me, when I say like dose makes the poison, it's just like understand that and I'm going to go through a bunch of examples today. It's kind of how I want to break down this episode, that everything is dose dependent, right? So when I think about dose dependent, right? So let's use, let's use this because I'm still peeling from my weekend in Tahoe a couple weeks ago. The sun, right? The sun has been demonized for a while now for some odd reason, right? Where people think that sun causes skin cancer. And it's funny. I see so many people nowadays are just like terrified of the sun. They're wearing their dorky little sun shirts. They're putting this like, obnoxious amount of sunscreen on and blah, 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 blah. And my kind of opinion on this has always been if the sun has been here for millions of years and skin cancer didn't take off till about 40, 50 years ago, like, let's try to just look at data and think about common sense here. Do we think that sun that's been here forever is the thing that's killing you and is harmful, right? Or is it maybe the chance that like there's a correlation or causation that as soon as sunscreen started becoming a thing, skin cancer started becoming more of a popular thing? Correlation, causation, that's up for you to decide. I'm not here to argue that. I have my kind of thoughts behind it that I'm like, if there is correlation, there could be a degree of causation, right? Because like correlation is a thing, but it's not just like an absolute answer towards it. So for me, when I think about the sun, it's like, okay, if plants need sun to grow, right? If all these things need sun and water to grow, then sun by definition should be good for us. But if I leave something baking in the sun at really high temperatures for a long time, let's use the desert as an example, there's not many things, wildlife or plantation or produce that really survive in there. So there's extremes, right? If I go to the ultra cold, let's use temperature as part of this kind of thing too, and I go to the ultra hot side, both extremes, we don't see a lot of things that survive well there, right? It's this balance of somewhere in the middle, right? So think about like where do we get majority of the produce in the life? It's around the equator, right? So like where the sun is a part of life, right? But it's not scorching hot. It's not in the desert. It's not dry. There's humidity, things like that. This is kind of a weird tangent example. But so when I think about this, it's like if I were to just microdose my sun exposure. Let's say I'm a very pale person, or I get that feedback sometimes from some of my clients and friends that are like, "Well, I'm white and I got freckles and things like that, blah 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 blah." So I can't really be in the sun at all. And I'm like, that's not true. You could be in the sun. You just need to be more careful of the sun, right? Even in skin cancers, it's funny. We think about like the darker the complexion of somebody, the more melanin somebody has, that actually some of these cultures and communities are the ones that deal with skin cancer the most. So it's like we can't even say that having a lot of melanin actually is the thing that it protects you from sun exposure, but it doesn't necessarily, from a health perspective, equate to removing yourself from the equation of skin cancer, which is why my opinion's always been like, there's other factors that can make you susceptible to any type of cancer, right? It could be lifestyle, it could be dietary, it could be, it goes on. So when I think about sun, it's like, okay, like, yes, what I did in Tahoe, I had the first day that I got there a couple weeks ago. We had a lake day, got there at 9 a.m. I don't think I left till 5. I was out in the water, I was paddle boarding, and I wasn't really under our tent that much. I was just out and about the whole time. And yes, I was lathering myself up, probably using a little more browning lotion, but just putting things on. But obviously I burned, right? And I kind of peeled from it. That's too much sun exposure. That's too much dose, right? So if we have too little, we're not getting the benefits of sun. If we go too much, I'm getting some of the harmful benefits, or sorry, I guess that would be a benefit, the harmful effects of sun. So the sweet spot is always this bell curve, and this kind of like when you think about this U curve graph that we see for so many things, there's a sweet spot in the middle, right? Pursuit of balance. It's like it comes as a parallel in every part of life. And that is an example of a dose dependent exposure, right? So I kind of wanted to talk about exposure therapy a little bit too, which I'll get to a little bit more in the dietary part of this conversation. So that is like one of many examples that I'll talk about today, right? So when you think about this, it's like number one, there is a dose, right? The dose is quote unquote what we would deem as the stimulus, right? There's also a capacity part to this, right? So how much capacity does someone have to handle the dose? I'll give you a drinking example. If someone doesn't drink at all, they might go out and have a glass of wine or 2 glasses of wine and feel a really strong buzz, right? Same dose. Now, if I were to go have 2 glasses of wine with you, it would do absolutely nothing to me. Why? Because I drink wine every night, right? And that dose would not affect me. So what's the difference? Is it the dose or is it the capacity? It's the capacity. So capacity will dictate the exposure therapy aspect of things, right? So when you think about dose dependent kind of exposure towards training, towards your nutrition, towards sun, towards drinking, towards there's a million things that can go into this, stress response, exactly, et cetera. Your capacity will dictate the amount of dose. And that is where those things I think can be relative by definition, right? Because someone with a high capacity, their dose might be higher on the absolute number side of things, but their relative effects might be the same. And then there's a recovery aspect, right? These are kind of like the 3 compartments that I put this kind of conversation in towards. It's like there's dose, there's capacity, and then there's recovery, right? Someone's recovery will generally be improved by someone's capacity, right? But relatively speaking, let's just use numbers here. If I am someone that can handle 10 drinks in a day and not be fucked up, right? I'm using alcohol as an example for some reason. It'd probably be a better way to do this, but we're just going to go with it. And I had 1 glass of wine, right? That is 10% of my capacity, right? My recovery is going to be pretty quick. If I'm someone that can only have 2 glasses of wine before it really screws me up the next day, then having 1 drink at dinner is 50% of your capacity, right? So 1 and 1 is both an absolute number. It's the exact same dose. Relatively speaking, person A is 10% of the relative effective capacity, right? Person B, that is 50% of their relative capacity. And that would dictate someone's recovery. And I hope this makes sense because I'm going to tie this into everything. But I want those 3 things to kind of be understood, that like your dose is relative to your capacity. Your capacity can be improved through exposure therapy by microdosing things over time, not by macrodosing things every once in a while. And that will obviously be just an equation on the next day as far as recovery goes, right? So let's talk about something that makes more sense for Corey to talk about. Let's talk about training, right? I do get this question all of the time when I'm signing up somebody new or sitting down in an assessment with somebody that's potentially going to sign up of like, what is the best amount of days or the perfect amount of days for me to train, right? So number one, that's a dose question, right? Your dose question is going to be dictated by what? That's going to be dictated by your capacity, right? So if someone is coming in, let's make something up. Person A, I just moved here from Austin, Texas. I was training at this gym 5 days a week, and they asked me that question, right? First thing I would ask, obviously, is how did you feel with 5 days a week? Did you get results? How was your recovery from your training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And I might suggest, hey, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. I mean, you've already done 5. You've had the exposure towards it. So it's not new to you. So you would be fine. If you want to come in here and sign up for 4 days a week or 5 days a week, I'm cool with it, right? Because I know your body has the capacity to do so, assuming that they said the recovery was decent from it and their lifestyle supports that. I'd be fine with that. Person B, I just moved here from Austin, Texas, and I didn't do anything for the last 5 years when I moved there. How many days a week should I work out? Why would I not say 4 or 5 days a week to start, right? Even though I will be clear on this, I think that everyone should be doing something 4 days a week, ideally 5 days a week, even maybe, but I would say 4 days a week for me is like the creme of the creme, right? 3 days a week, I think is a freaking solid place to be. 2 days a week, you better be doing something else or you better be starting off. So in order for this case, for person B, I might say 2 or 3 days a week to start. Why? Capacity, recovery, the other two elements of dose, does the dose make the poison? Because if I give that person a 5-day-a-week program in our program or any program, they might not have the capacity to be able to handle that, right? And that capacity is going to obviously be lower, which is going to ruin the way they feel the following day. They're going to be the person crawling around, can't sit down on the toilet, everything hurts, possibly injured and overtraining. When I did my CrossFit certification forever ago, they had this term called, there is a term called rhabdo, which is basically just a clear sign of overtraining where your muscle literally breaks down so much to the degree that it becomes toxic for the body. And I was like, man, this is interesting that they even talk about this in a certification. I've never heard about this in any other certification. But then if anybody's ever done CrossFit, you know that some of those workouts can be fucking intense, right? And if they're too intense for somebody that does not have the capacity, they don't have the ability to recover well, right? So when you look at those things on a training sense, the dose makes the poison. The dose of someone working out 5 days a week for someone that has the capacity to do so, it's not poison, right? And I use this in quotations for those that are only listening to this. That poison is dictated by the other end of it, which is the capacity side, right? So, but the other person that's brand new, 5 days a week, that's be too harsh. I was gonna say send them into the hospital. I don't think it would do that. But it's definitely gonna make them question, like, do I want to keep training for this? And I will say, in my career, it's a very, very popular response for somebody in the first 2 weeks. Like, we do a 12-week commitment because I think that really is the minimum thing that anybody should do on any diet, training, lifestyle, job, relationship. Like, you got to give it enough time to even see if it works, because in the beginning, you're going to question things more than you ever will. You go to a gym, you go to a new job, you go to a new place, like, you're always going to be the most uncomfortable. You don't know the people, you don't know the workouts, you don't know the thing. The diet's hard. I miss door dashing. I hate cooking, like all those things. So that is obviously why I say that. But another thing that I say inside of that kind of commitment period is, like, your first 3 weeks will by definition feel shitty. They will suck. And the reason why is your body is not adapted to that stimulus, right? Your body is not adapted to that quote unquote dose. So for person A or person B that's brand new, I do want to get them to the 3. I do want to get them to the 4, and I do want to get them maybe to the 5. And I'm not saying with us, but just in general, I want like 4 or 5 days of movement. So that is kind of like one example in the exercise world that, like, the dose makes the poison, but the dose is dictated by capacity, right? So now let's go into the nutrition world, right? So in the nutrition world, we all know that we should be prioritizing whole food, that we should be cooking more from home instead of eating out via DoorDash or restaurants, ideally, if we can, that we should be prioritizing more produce and fiber, that we should be prioritizing more protein. And that we should be limiting processed food, ultra refined foods, not relying on supplements, not relying on, like I said, takeout and things like that. So we know the fundamentals. But what gets demonized is some people think that you should never do this, right? And this is where I said this last week in an episode that I think this will eventually become an episode, I'm sure, because I keep bringing it up. That like I've never liked things that really have a name, right? So it's like if your diet is called carnivore and they say that you should never have these foods, or if your diet's keto, you should never have carbohydrates. That is a very closed-minded point of view to think. And it's also a very dogmatic approach to it. And it's a very fearful kind of front for marketing to make people say that, like, oh, because of carbs, that's why you've never been successful. It's like, well, I don't think that's true. It's like, well, because of vegetables and their anti-nutrients, that's why your diet is failing, right? So it's very easy to just pick on something and say that's the problem for it. But let's talk about it. The dose makes the poison. Are carbs bad? Fuck no. Carbs are good. You should be having carbs in your diet. And anybody tells you to remove your carbs from your diet, fire them. Now, is it a very powerful thing to carb cycle? Is it a very powerful thing to reduce carbs for a period of time? Absolutely. I still do it, right? I put carbs as kind of my parallel lever with life on activity. When I'm very active and I'm moving a lot, I'm training a lot, running a lot, whatever it might be, I have a lot of carbs. When I'm not as active, I kind of just reduce them naturally because I think like that is my main fuel source for energy. I never completely remove them, but I definitely lower them a bit. So like by definition, it's like, okay, like carbs have a subjectivity towards everything too, right? Let's go to the plant side. There's a lot of people in the carnivore world that like to demonize plants, right? So when you think about phytates and lectins and oxalates, oxalates would be something like spinach has a high oxalate count, right? And oxalate can be the things that lead to kidney stones, right? And so a lot of people like to like hold on to something that has fear behind the statement of like, well, if you're eating a lot of plants, eating a lot of spinach, you could have kidney stones, right? And that is going to be very toxic because those are anti-nutrients. So they hinder the absorption of iron. They hinder the absorption of other minerals and vitamins that you're eating. So why the fuck would you eat it? But at the end of the day, it's just like anything else. That a little bit of vegetables every once in a while is probably pretty good for people. If you have an incredible amount of any food, yes, it can be bad for you. So once again, we're on this bell-shaped curve of, the upside down U when you look at this visually for those that are listening or think about this visually that are listening, that like the sweet spot is the middle, right? It's like fruit. People go, oh, it's high in fructose. It's a lot of sugar. So you don't want to eat it. You don't want to eat any fruit. It's like, no, fruit's good for you. It's got vitamins. It's got minerals. It's got hydration. It's got fiber. It's got good carbohydrates, right? Because they're going to be what we would deem as more not processed or refined carbs, right? These are going to be more fibrous carbohydrates. But yeah, if I'm eating 20 bananas a day and I'm someone that sits in my ass for a living, it's like, yeah, that's probably not going to be the most ideal thing for you. But having no fruit or no vegetables, it's very clear that if you look at some of the research, that some of the best health outcomes we have is by prioritizing more fibrous foods, right? Which are your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains, things like that. So I just think that like things in moderation always exist. And people unfortunately like to take extreme point of views because extreme point of views have more conviction and people can convince you as the consumer that if you just avoid this completely, you'll be in a good place. And that is a load of baloney, right? And then the keto world, right? It's like, it's funny when I went through a period where I wouldn't say I was necessarily fully keto, but I went like higher fat for a while and lower carb. And I kind of switched my breakfast to kind of being a little bit more just fat and protein only and almost no carbohydrates. And I will say, I felt pretty good. I feel like my energy was pretty stable. I was tracking blood sugar during that period too. And I feel like, I didn't have any of these like spikes that I would get normally from like other foods as far as carbs or sugars go. And so it's very easy to just be like, okay, from a correlation effect that like this is not ideal because I want to be able to manage stable blood sugar. But through education and maturity, I realized it's nothing wrong with blood sugar going up as long as it returns to baseline in a timely manner and it don't have these crazy drops, right? And those peaks and troughs were the thing that I needed to pay attention to. Didn't know that, had to go through some education, had to go through some experimentation, but eventually I was like, okay, that's not merely that maybe the most sustainable approach to me. But why I bring up that story is like I started doing a lot of butter. I started doing a lot of olive oil. I started kind of going a little bit more bacon than I should. And I realized that like fat and carbs are like two energy substrates that our body use. And where most people can get in trouble, I believe from what I've learned, is when you're doing high both. Doing high fat, high carb. I think if you're doing high carb, low fat, phenomenal. If you're doing high fat, low carb, phenomenal outcome, right? I think it's where is it more sustainable? And I think somewhere it tends to be the more middle ground for some of us, and depending on activity levels. But once again, it was easy for me to just demonize, like, oh yeah, the reason why I didn't feel good was like carbohydrates. But it's like, well, it's like, no, it was like the quality of the carbs really what I realized of like, if I'm eating like processed, refined, sugary foods, if I had a donut for breakfast, yeah, I have this gnarly sugar spike and I would have this gnarly crash, and I felt like I needed to take a nap. So for me, I just blamed carbs as a community. Right. And that is something that, I think is a big mistake for so many humans nowadays, is we think this one correlation effect is like, well, that makes this whole class of this thing that I'm talking about a problem. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty dumb answer, right? Like you're not taking any common sense into this and any thought process that it's like that could be one correlation effect. That doesn't mean it's the causation for the whole thing. So when it comes to your sweets, when it comes to your alcohol, when it comes to the foods that get demonized all the time, when it comes to your vegetables, when it comes to your fruits, understand that the dose makes the poison. So, in moderation, those things are totally fine, right? Like, we want to have moderation, we want to have exposure. The next subject that I'm going to bring on is like, so there's a thing called a hormetic response, right? So, when you think about stress, for example, let's think about it this way. This maybe is a good preface to everything else that I was saying, that stress is a good thing when it's microdosed correctly and there is capacity and recovery phases towards it, right? So when I build capacity to handle stress and I know how to recover and I am able to recover from it, stress is a very healthy thing for the body, right? So a hormetic response is basically, in a layman's terms, more of a microdosing of a stress. When I go to the gym, so let's come back to the gym analogy. If I go work out 8 times a week and I've never worked out, that is not a hormetic response. That is a huge response and it's too stressful. You are overtrained, you will break down, you will be in this catabolic state. Training is this balance, and life is this balance between these peaks and valleys of being anabolic and being catabolic. When I am working out, my body is in a catabolic state, right? So through this valley, I am breaking down my muscle. I am breaking down my body, right? And there's nothing wrong with that as long as I have the capacity to be able to handle it. And more importantly, I have the recovery period to become anabolic again. So in the stress world, you've heard me say this multiple times for those that have been listening consistently, there is a sympathetic response, fight or flight, right? That is more catabolic, that is exercise. Then there is a parasympathetic state that is more rest and digest. If I want to be able to recover, if I want to be able to digest foods effectively, if I want to be able to recover from workouts and grow muscle and become stronger, I need to be able to recover. I need to get back into this parasympathetic state. That's where anabolism exists. And that is where we build. That is where we recover. So when we come back to the dose response part of this on a stress level, if I'm always exposing myself to constant stress, then I'm becoming what we would consider to be more chronically stressed. Now, there's a lot of people that I don't know what would be the best term to use, like under apply the hormetic stressors in life and are just overdone on the chronic stresses of life, right? They're not sleeping well enough. They're stressed. I actually saw this cool graph, and it was basically starting from like 1915 to 2025. And it was showing like the average sleep, right? Of like, what does a toddler sleep on average? What does an adult sleep on average? And what does a teenager sleep? And it started off in like, the well, let's remove the kid, for example. It's just like the teenagers and adults. It started off in like the 9.5 hours of like something. And it just slowly dropped and dropped and dropped. And I think when we got to like, maybe it was like 2020, it was over like the last 5 or 10 years, the teenagers actually dropped below adults, which I thought was an interesting thing on that graph. I haven't fact checked this, but I can believe most of this. That it dropped all the way down for most adults and teenagers that were in like the low to mid sixes for average sleep. And I think most people listen to this, if you were to ask like, how many hours are you sleeping, right? And here's one interesting thing for anybody that's ever tracked sleep via Whoop, via Aura, via Apple Watch, via sleep, whatever, sleep test. you'll realize that you could be in bed. So if I go to bed at 10 p.m. and I wake up at 6 a.m., that's 8 hours in bed. But then I'll realize that my body is maybe only 80, 85, 90% efficient with that sleep, right? So meaning that like over the course of that 8 hours, I might only actually get 6 hours of sleep. So in order for me, if I didn't change my efficiency of my sleep, I would need to be in bed for 9.5 hours to get my 8 hours of sleep, right? Um, and so I don't know why I was bringing that up, but like whatever. So coming back to the parasympathetic, I think I was talking about just the recovery of stress. Um, that we want to have these periods of stress and not stress, right? Stress, recover, train, sleep. Not eating, eating, feast and famine, right? I think these cycles of life is what makes life work really, really well, and I think it's what makes it sustainable. And I also think it, like I said, what makes it more effective. So when I come back to the other aspects of like what are hormetic stressors, exercise is a hormetic stress, right? I'm breaking down my body through a period of recovery. I will get stronger, get better. Not eating, right? So intermittent fasting. Why is it a powerful strategy? Because I'm putting myself in a degree of caloric deficit by removing time from eating, right? Keto is a hormetic stress because I'm removing a macronutrient, aka carbs, from that. So it's a hormetic stress. Things that I do at home, I'll give you another example, is I do the sauna. So I probably sauna, I would say probably 4 times minimum, but probably like 4 to 5 times a week is probably like my average. And when I remember when I saw the research of like all cause mortality, right? And I had some stuff on my mom's, like my mom, the guys on my mom's side, basically, where I was like, okay, maybe I need to do these other things on the cardiovascular side of health as a bigger priority to my training. And that was where just the aerobic fitness and sauna kind of came into the play. That it's like someone sauning, and this I'm going to butcher the math a little bit here, but I would say someone sauning like twice a week was getting like a 23% reduction in like all cause mortality or cardiovascular, right? Someone going to 4 or 5 times a week was up to like 60%, right? So you can kind of see it's like for me, it's like, but it's like if I were to do sauna too long, too often, it's now going to become a bad thing for my body, right? Because now I'm going to be dehydrated. There's going to be other factors that are going to make that not a benefit to the body. So a sauna for me 4 times a week for 20 minutes at 180, 200 degrees is a hormetic response, right? These heat shock proteins, the adaptation to temperature, the sweat, the detox, all the benefits that come from sauna. And it's like, in a sense, it's kind of like tricking my body that I'm doing some type of cardiovascular training. Because if I look at my heart rate, I'm at like 120, 130 beats per minute sitting there doing nothing. So that's another aspect. Cold plunge, cold therapy, right? So I am exposing myself to extreme temperatures in the sauna, and I'm exposing myself to more extreme temperatures in cold. For those that are doing cold plunges, I have a couple of my clients that have them. I always say like it's not colder is better, right? So for me, it's like what I've researched and found is like mid to high 40s is the sweet spot, and 2 to 3 minutes is all you need, right? And I do that after my sauna, and I would do that 4 or 5 times a week. And that from immunal function and the cold shock proteins and adaptation to even just being able to handle. So like I think about it this way, like there is a cool study that was done for people that were doing sauna after runs and how that improved their, just aerobic fitness levels by almost 20+%. And why that happened is like, I'm sure is more of like a cardio output, because you can imagine what the blood vessels and the heart have to do just from extreme heat, but also is more of the mental aspect of being able to handle discomfort, because a lot of people with training and running specifically or ultras, they have run into problems where they overheat, right? We have, like Coach Damien, Billy, Brent, one of our clients, Sal, old coach of ours, they were doing like ultra marathons, when they still kind of do. And I remember a couple of times, like Damien brought up, he's like, yeah, it's just like, I feel like I was running, it's like overheating problems, right? Or I was talking to Brent yesterday about this, and he was saying that like even just like not getting enough fuel in. Those are all very, I mean, ultra marathons are super stressful for the body. So let's be clear on that. But you can imagine the benefit of like if they were to incorporate a little bit of like some heat training into their training, right? Because not only just cardio output of like aerobic health and aerobic fitness, but also your ability to be able to cool yourself down is a superpower when you think about endurance sports, right? So I'm assuming that there's probably a huge degree of correlation and causation behind like the heat shock, right? And the benefit that you get from that. So that's one of other aspects of life, right? So I kind of give you guys a handful of examples that I really want to be clear that I think like everything in life I forget what the movie was called. There was like moderations for cowards. Like anything worth doing is worth overdoing. I want to say it was like some military movie because that sounds like a military line. Like I want to say it was the one with the Navy SEALs and or the sniper movie, whatever. So there's one part of me that kind of laughs at moderation where it's like, I feel like I was always a very extremist type of mindset. Which is funny because like as the guy that like has a podcast named Pursuit of Balance that preaches pursuit of balance, that preaches, infinity is something that comes from sustainability, and sustainability is built on the foundation of joy and enjoyment. And I think that when you overdo something in life, you lose parts of other things in order to make it work. Like when I wanted to be really successful in my business and my financial life, my social life kind of suffered. My relationship suffered. When I was prioritizing early in my life, my social aspect, my financial health side. So there's a balancing act to all these things. But I think the dose is what makes the poison for everything that we look in life. And you can use this analogy or term towards everything, right? So your dose will be relative to your capacity, right? So just to finish that off, the higher someone's capacity to handle time without food, time in the sauna, your training, etc. Like I think about this as like I can go in the sauna for longer than I could in the beginning, right? Because my capacity is higher, right? I could train harder than the average person by a mile, probably by 10, 100x because I train consistently, right? I can go without food almost all day long because I'm able to fast with those things. But like, so that is a capacity thing. Your recovery, that third module I was talking about, your recovery is dictated by the dose relative to capacity, right? So if your dose is a huge chunk of your capacity, your recovery is going to be hindered, right? And there's this fine act of dose, aka stimulus, and then adaptation. Adaptation, quote unquote, your recovery. So when you think about all these things in life that you're trying to do or trying to get started, remember, if you don't have a lot of capacity to handle the stress, if you don't have a lot of capacity to handle the training, you don't have a lot of capacity to handle the certain foods or certain calories or certain carbs or certain amount of time that you're eating, then you need to lower the dose in the beginning and you need to expose yourself to these things. And like in the dietary world, like these peanut allergies, these egg allergies, the fish allergies, like what are one of the things that they do as a in the hospital is like they start to expose you to these things. And the micro dosing of exposure is the thing that's going to give you this huge benefit of what we're looking for, because exposure therapy by definition is basically saying that avoidance is not the answer. And I say this a lot, that avoidance will never be the answer. The thing that's most important to do is make sure that you can microdose where you can balance out, understand that you can build a little bit of a capacity, and then you can manage your dose correctly. I was talking to my best friend at his bachelor party a couple weeks ago, and like he went sober, I don't know, probably been a year and a half, whatever it's been. And I'm like, I have two of my good friends that like don't drink anymore. And I'm like, is your goal to never drink again? And he's like, no, I just like, I was like not really managing it correctly, and he had the capacity to handle it, but he didn't have the capacity or ability, I guess would be a better way to say, to manage the amount that he was having dose wise, right? So like learning how to like actually enjoy it or microdose it a little bit better in these analogies I'm using, where he's like, hey, I want to be able to get back to a place where I can kind of just like have a couple of drinks and like be a little bit healthier with my relationship on these things. And I'm like, cool. And I think that should be like the end goal that we all have. Like so many people like to just look at things as good or bad. The way I try to view things is I like this continuum based approach, that everything is on a continuum. Some things are going to be better for you, not good for you, right? Or some things are going to be worse for you, not bad for you. And I want to do more things that prioritize being towards good, but the things that are good for me can be bad for me depending on the dose, right? So water's fantastic for everyone. We all know that. But we've heard of people that have died from drinking too much water, right? Like you can overhydrate. So that thing that was healthy with an extreme dose is now unhealthy or bad or lethal. And that's how all aspects of life are. We see people that overtrain. We see people that overdo it on calories. You see people that overdo it on sweets or processed foods. And like that is where the dose has become lethal or unhealthy to people, right? So everything that you do in life, your work, your management of stress, try to find that balance of like there is a hormetic stressor. There is a balance between the things that are going to give you the perfect amount of stress that allow you to continually grow over time, and then you can build a capacity and you can recover fast from it, right? So I hope that wasn't a too random of a story for you guys, but I thought this would be kind of a cool one to share and maybe a cool framework to be able to live with, right? Because in everything in life, I think the balance is the sweet spot, because as always, it's the pursuit of balance, right? All right, guys. Well, as always, if you find this one helpful, if you find that somebody can benefit from this one, please share it. Review the show too, like I feel like I've been stuck at like 9 freaking reviews on Spotify. Like, if you guys do enjoy this, I get a lot of great feedback in person and on the email. But help a boy out, man. Review it every once in a while. Thank you guys.